Hello and welcome to the Bible Character Podcast. I'm your host, Delight. Tonight is not just a story, it's a memory, a moment that still echoes through generations. Because tonight, we're speaking with a man who walked with God, who left everything behind to follow a voice he barely understood, and who, on one silent night, was asked to give up the very son he waited a lifetime for. A man of faith, of laughter, and of obedience that broke his own heart. My guest is Abraham, father of nation, friend of God. Abraham, welcome.
I still remember the first time I heard him speak. It was like the wind had a voice. I didn't see anyone, but I knew it wasn't coming from around me. It was coming from within me. He said, "Leave your father's house. Go to a land I will show you." And without knowing where or how, I went. His voice, it brought direction. It brought hope. It always carried a promise. But that night, the night he asked for Isaac, it felt different. That time, it wasn't a promise. It was a test. He didn't say, "I will bless you." He said, "Give me your son. Not just any son. Your only son. The one you love." There was no thunder, no earthquake, no loud voice shaking the mountains. Just a whisper. But it shattered me inside. And the strangest part, it came in the quietest moment. No animals moving, no fire burning, no wind in the trees. Just me, awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling of a tent I built with my own hands, and wondering, did I hear right? Sometimes when God speaks, it's not to excite you, it's to reveal you. And that night, he revealed something in me that I didn't know was still there. Attachment. Not to sin, not to wealth, but to something I loved deeply. Isaac. The promise had become part of my heart, and now God was asking, "Do I still have your heart?" They called him a miracle, but to me, he was more than that. He was laughter. That's why I named him Isaac. Because when God told me Sarah would have a child, I laughed. Not because I didn't believe, but because I didn't understand how faith could stretch that far. I was almost 100. Sarah had stopped hoping, and when I told her what God said, she laughed too. Not a joyful laugh, a tired one, like someone who had prayed too long and seen too little. But 9 months later, that same woman held a baby in her arms, and the tent was filled with joy. I remember his first steps. He ran like the wind, but always came back to me. He loved to touch the sheep, but he hated when they bleated too loud. And every time he said Abba, I felt something rise in me, like the past was worth it, like the wait made sense. We raised him with smiles, with stories, with firelight. And even when Sarah got protective, and she did, I would tell her, "Let the boy climb. If he falls, we'll catch him." He was our everything. And now, that same boy, God wanted him back. The one I waited for. The one I cried for. The one I thought I'd never meet. It didn't make sense. Not in my head. Not in my heart. But deep in my spirit. I knew it was God. The same voice that told me I'd be a father was now asking if I still trusted him to be the father of all. People talk about the knife, but that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was walking beside him, waking up early, telling Sarah, "We'll be back," knowing full well I didn't know if we would. Loading the wood, calling Isaac, and starting up the mountain like it was any other day. But it wasn't. I kept looking at him, his stride, his smile, the way he hummed to himself when he walked. He always did that. And I kept thinking, does he know? On the second day of the journey, he looked at me and said, "Father, we have the wood and the fire, but where's the lamb?" That moment broke something in me. I had practiced obedience. I had trained my ears to hear God, but nothing prepares you for your own child looking up and asking, "Where's the lamb?" I said, "God will provide." and I meant it. But part of me was still hoping he'd change his mind before we reached the top. When we got there, I built the altar slowly. I kept looking around. Any bush, any sound, anything. But nothing came. Then, I turned to Isaac. I couldn't look him in the eye, but he didn't run. He didn't fight. He trusted me. And I tied him, with trembling hands, while my heart screamed inside. It wasn't just rope I wrapped around him. It was everything I ever believed about God. I lifted the knife, but even before I could breathe in, I saw the tears in his eyes. Not fear, not anger, just tears. And I knew, even if God didn't stop me, even if I gave him Isaac, a part of me would never come down from that mountain. I didn't see the ram yet, but I saw my son. And he was enough to make any man hesitate. But that's the thing about faith. It doesn't always make sense, but it must always move forward. The moment I raised that knife, he stopped me. A voice, clear, calm, certain. Abraham, Abraham, do not lay a hand on the boy. And in that instant, everything in me collapsed. I dropped the knife, I fell to the ground, and I wept like a man who had just touched the edge of something holy, and survived it. There was a ram, caught in the thicket. It had been there the whole time. I just hadn't seen it, because I was too focused on what I thought God was taking, to see what he had already provided. Later, when I sat beside Isaac, holding him, checking every part of him, I realized something. God never wanted the boy. He wanted my heart. It was never about Isaac's life. It was about my loyalty. Would I still trust him, even when the promise was on the altar? Would I still say yes, even when it felt like he was undoing what he once spoke? That's the part no one teaches you. Sometimes obedience looks like losing. Sometimes faith feels like madness. But in that moment, when heaven spoke and the test ended, I understood something I'll never forget. God will never take your promise. He will only test who owns it. If it owns you, he'll ask for it. If he owns you, he'll give it back stronger than before. I loved Isaac, but I had to love God more. That's not a verse, that's a scar. And even today, if I close my eyes, I still hear that voice. Now I know that you fear God. If you're listening right now, and you feel like God is asking you to surrender something, I know what that feels like. I know the ache. I know the questions. I know the silence. But let me tell you what I've learned. God doesn't ask for what he needs. He asks for what you love, so he can show you who really holds it all together. If you hold too tight to the gift, you may forget the giver. But when you release it, you find that his hands are stronger than yours ever were. I won't lie to you. Trusting God isn't easy. It's not romantic. It's not always peaceful. It hurts sometimes. But after all I've seen, after all I've lost and gained, I'd rather walk in painful obedience than comfortable disobedience. Because one step with God, even if it's uphill, even if it's through tears, is better than 1,000 steps without him. And yes, if Sarah had known what I was planning that morning, she would have sent an army after me. I'm not joking. She would have had camels packed and ready by sunrise. She would have stood at the foot of that mountain with her hands on her hips shouting, "Abraham, bring that boy back down or I'm coming up there myself." But I didn't tell her. Not because I was hiding it, but because some journeys are walked alone. Not even your closest can understand every step God asks you to take. So, to you listening, hold the promise with open hands. Trust him. Even when it looks like loss, there may be a ram just behind the bush, waiting. And the moment you surrender is the moment heaven speaks again.
Thank you, Abraham, for your honesty, for your strength, and for reminding us that surrender is not weakness, it's worship. That day on the mountain, it wasn't just a test. It was a window into your heart and God's. Sometimes, we read the story and think it was all about the knife, But today, we heard what it felt like to carry the fire and the silence. And maybe that's where you are too, walking up your own mountain, carrying something heavy, wondering if God will speak before it's too late. Let this episode remind you, He sees, He provides, He speaks, even in the dark. And if this conversation touched you in any way, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below. What part of Abraham's journey spoke to you most? Let's make this more than a podcast. Let's make it a place where people can share, heal, and grow together. You've been listening to the Bible Character Podcast with me, Delight. Until next time, keep walking, even when it's uphill.